Good afternoon, everyone. And as Ian said, welcome to this webinar. So today we're going to be talking about veterinary CPD. This really is a small and nevertheless very competitive market out there. Vets, exactly like GPs, consultants, nurses and pharmacists, are incredibly time poor, and are the target for lots of demands for attention from companies trying to sell them products and services. So recently, of course, CPD has become quite a recognised vehicle for brands to build on their engagement with vets. And although the fact that a lot of the brand-sponsored CPD is in itself free, what it actually has done is created its own competitive playing field. Some of whom within there are doing it very, very well, others not quite so well. Now, as I'm sure many of you listening in today will know, it isn't cheap to actually produce, so it is important that we get it right. So what we wanted to do today was just have a very, very brief look at the background to this issue and what's going on in the veterinary market at the moment to contextualise the role of CPD, and then really get on to the meat of it, which is all about the 5 tips that we've garnered from our research to perhaps give you some tips to achieve genuine engagement through your own CPD. Just a brief word about who the hell we are and why we're doing this. Well, as Ian said, we've been working in healthcare as an agency for over 10 years now, but individuals within the company have been involved in the sector for a lot longer than that. And what we're talking about today isn't just based on our opinions, based on that experience. What we do at the Foundry is we hold conversations on a regular basis with healthcare professionals, both human and animal healthcare. And it's really about having panels where we sit down and we talk to people who are there on the front line, just really about general topical issues. And the latest one we did was with a number of vets talking about exactly this issue, about the way in which they responded to, felt about brand-sponsored CPD. So you'll hear from them as we go through the presentation. So just a brief canter through what's going on within the market. Well, UK's got about 22 million pets. Just under half of UK households have at least one pet in them. And to service that market, you've got around about 15,000 vets who are operational and working in the UK, looking after all of those animals. So what's been going on within the market? Well, in actual recent times, the market itself has been flatlining for a little while, but is in fact showing signs of picking up. Some recent research from PricewaterhouseCoopers has shown that there is a slight increase in growth forecast for 2013 to 14 of just under sort of 2%. So things are picking up, and the revenues, according to Eavesdrop, are forecast to continue picking up over the next 5 years. But within that, there are some quite complex things going on. So what we'd like to do now is just have a quick look at some of the trends that are going on that are behind those figures. Well, one of the key things that's been happening within veterinary in recent years is the decline in large animal practice. As agriculture has changed and the trend towards sort of smaller farms with fewer livestock, increasingly diversified activity, what that's resulting in is less demand for veterinary specialists in large animal. On the other side of things, we have seen growth in pet ownership and the sort of concomitant demands by owners. So to some extent, what we've seen is veterinary surgeons migrating from large animal practice through into small animal, companion animal practice. And while that has been happening, obviously what we have seen is an increase in the competition amongst these small animal practices. There's also been a massive gender shift in veterinary medicine. When we look back at, as recently as 1998, just 1 in 3 vets were women, which has changed massively. By 2010, according to RCVS statistics, 54% of vets were female. And when you started to look at vets under 40, that jumped up again to 71%. Of vets, UK vets under 40 being female. And in fact, when you look at undergraduates, it jumps again to 80%. So a very, very big shift in genders of the profession that's been happening relatively recently. And of course, big impacts that's having on the profession as a whole. One of the other key things that's influencing our practices that we're trying to talk to is the rise in what's going on online. In common with human healthcare, what we've got going on with there, we've talked to our nurses a lot about this buzzword about the empowered patient, about people having an awful lot more invested into finding things out for themselves. Well, exactly, of course, the same thing is happening with within the veterinary industry. You've got pet owners now who are increasingly using the internet to sort of self-diagnose and self-medicate, even, you know, amongst medicines which really should be used sort of through the medium of the veterinary professional. So what that's meaning for veterinary practices, of course, is combined with recessionary pressures. You know, owners more often may well be skipping some of these sort of less serious, seeing the vet for these less serious conditions, or skipping routine appointments, which means that sort of, you know, for vets, two fairly regular lower level income streams, you know, sort of jabs, wormers, supplements, these types of things, are coming under pressure from what's going on online. On the other side of things, what we have seen is massive advances into the complexity of treatments, which is sort of driving increased expectations amongst pet owners. So the landscape is changing in terms of treatment options that are available. And one of the things that's happening, of course, is that as generic medicines sort of become more available and cheaper, what it can do is open treatments or new consumers up to new conditions. For example, medications that were originally formulated to alleviating conditions in elderly pets, specifically older dogs, things like respiratory brain function medications. As they become cheaper, some vets are increasingly offering them to a wider patient audience to sort of, you know, help pep up a pet at the end of its natural life. So there's, you know, different options and different things that are coming on board. Pet insurance, again, is a big element of that. You know, the number of products that are available in the pet insurance market has grown by 38% since 2008, according to de facto. And in fact, we've also seen a further 86 providers coming onto that market in recent years. So lots more products available in the pet insurance arena. And, you know, they're servicing these increasingly complex procedures, which is in turn increasing demand and throughput of demand for veterinary services. Market dynamics have been quite interesting as well. What we have seen is a big rise in corporate practices since 1999, when the RCVS relaxed rules about practice ownership. In 2009, 11% of practices were made up of these corporates, which VetFile actually forecasts to increase to around about 20% by about 2020. Now, what this is meaning is the dynamic for you know, the big bulk of small independent veterinary practices means that they've got to compete in a really changing market. They've got to be able to market themselves effectively against this new model of competition. They've got to be able to adapt, and they need to really think about differentiation against the sort of corporate model that's increasingly becoming available in their areas. So when we start to look at what the impact of these sorts of trends have on our veterinary professional, well, these individual independent practices are really under increasing pressure to perform as businesses as well as operating as medical professionals, which is important for us as marketeers to understand when we're thinking about building our communications and trying to establish brand relationships with these professionals. Let's just start to think a little bit about this audience in a little bit more detail. We think about vets, we're marketing CPD vets. Actually, within that category, we need to understand that the number of individuals that's going on within the practice who have different levels of influence in terms of decision making, but also in terms of their own information needs when we're starting to think about CPD. For example, senior vets, practice owners very close to the finance, might be doing the deals in terms of their interaction with pharma companies. Junior vets, perhaps just an influence on that level, perhaps having more interaction directly with customers. Whereas even within, receptionists, for example, they're really more at the front line. They could well be influenced for selling products such as food, flea treatments, wormers, and supplements. So, everybody within this hierarchy, they're not all, they're under the label of vet, but they've all got their influence, they've all got their place within the practice. So thinking about the provision of CPD, it's a useful thing to start to think about beyond just working with vets, as though this amorphous whole market. Now, when we had our last session with our vets who were on our Foundry Healthcare panel, as I say, we spoke quite a lot about CPD and really grilled them about what their needs were and what was going on in the way that they started to source and think about CPD for themselves. And there were a number of drivers that they talked about. Firstly, stage in career obviously has a big impact in terms of your information needs. When we were talking about the senior vets and the practice owners, it was a lot really about wanting to know what was the real cutting edge, what they were after there, for example. And again, that position within the practice, am I the new boy that's really starting to want to try and build my career and influence people and be seen to be sort of really really engaged with things, or am I there, am I somebody that's been around for a while? Budget is a biggie. Obviously, CPD is a massive market from courses that cost many thousands of pounds and involve sort of residential stays and even sort of surgical practice and so on, right the way through to what we're talking about today, the brand-sponsored, often online delivery of CPD. And then you've got things like, what am I personally interested in? What things that, are really, really driving me to want to find out with? And that's then balanced again. Sometimes the practice needs come into this. As a practice, we really need somebody that's going to be become an expert on dermatology, for example. And then the other thing about actually fitting it in, what is the available time that I've been given? Can I do it at work? Am I doing it in my own time? Is it something that I need to fit into my evenings and weekends? How does it sort of work in terms of me actually scheduling my own work time? And of course, obviously, as one of the differing individual consideration, there are masses of options in terms of what you can do. There's residential, there's online, there's going through to the conventions, there's lunch and learns that we can start to think of, and all of which, whether they are free or paid for, they've all got to compete. All of these suppliers of CPD, they've all got to compete for limited time and limited attention in the same way that, the product marketing has to compete for those very things. So in that landscape, what did our vets really think about brand-sponsored CPD, the stuff that was coming out from the pharma companies, the marketing companies? Well, generally it was a very, very positive picture. It was generally really valued. There was an absolute expectation and acceptance that the CPD that came through from the brands was going to be linked through with the product area. And there was a convention in there that was going to be, tell me all about the condition, give me information that's going to help me in terms of my diagnosis, my understanding of the condition, and then move it on and tell me more about the solution to that. And at some point, yes, of course, I understand that there's going to be a link through to what you do. Although, again, the convention seems to be that none of them really felt as though they were being overtly salesy or pushing product down the vet's throats, which they were appreciative of. The perception was about the brand-sponsored CPD that they tended to be pitched at a fairly basic level, at a fairly entry level. And as part and parcel of that, there was also the expectation that they were going to be free, and also that they were going to continue to be free. So within the brand-sponsored CPD, what were the differentiators when you looked at different providers in this sphere? Well, people differentiated on the basis of providers who were innovators rather, as opposed to some of the companies out there who were perhaps more famous for being involved in producing generic medicines. So there's a little bit more credibility if you're out there and you're developing new drugs and new treatments. Outside of that, key opinion leaders, who are you sort of getting your credibility from? Getting into bed with key opinion leaders to front up your CPD, again, gives it some added interest, some added credibility. And again, integration, is this a subject, is this a product, is this a condition that you're also making a lot of noise about beyond and around the CPD modules. So all of those sorts of things start to help in terms of getting individual CPD programs and pieces sort of up the ladder of consideration for our vets. So, it's a hugely complex subject. As always, within 30 minutes, it's impossible to do more than be very, very superficial in terms of these things. But just to give you a bit of a pointer, we've tried to come up with 5 sort of broad do's and don'ts that might start to hopefully get you to think about ways in which you can examine your own forays into CPD and perhaps improve it. So firstly, really, it's thinking about how do you differentiate? Well, as we saw earlier, there's more than one potential audience out there for your CPD. Yes, we're talking about veterinary medicine, but, all of these people in the practice have got very different levels of expertise and therefore information need. As we've said before, it could be our senior vets thinking about cutting-edge innovations in treatment and condition. So it could well be that they were thinking about the brand-sponsored stuff as not being for them. However, they did think that it had a value for their team. So it could well be that, they're seeing it as being much more appropriate for the junior vets in the practice. So they're still valuing it, even if they're not the primary audience from it. But what we did find with the sort of more junior and middle tier vets and so on, is one of the things that they felt about CPD was it was oftentimes difficult to really get exactly who it was aimed at. Oftentimes they needed to get into the CPD before they really got to grips with who it was for or whether it was suitable for them. So one of the things that they were saying would be really, really helpful was some sort of signposting, so that you're able to really connect with the most appropriate audience for their content. Make it easy for them to see that it's relevant, before they're actually sort of logging on and then deciding that it's not there. And again, try not to be all things to all men. One of our vets there was saying, I've been to CPD where they're trying to appeal to everybody, all levels of competence. Well, actually, you can't do that. It might well be ideal for one person, but somebody else is in there thinking, well, this isn't anything new for me. And they're the people that are dropping out, and that's what we want to sort of try and avoid. Quizzes were interesting. A lot of our vets were actually saying we know that the CPD tends to have quizzes involved. Usually they're at the end. So a lot of people were sort of skipping through to the end, doing the quiz, and then deciding, well, if I get 10 out of 10, forget it. I'm not going to get involved. I already know where this is being pitched. So potentially start to maybe consider a pre-quiz for individuals to determine if that content is new for them. Again, just a little pointer that might well help with the engagement for the audience of your CPD. And again, as we've said before, really think about everybody within the practice. Everybody's got those different roles. Some of our vets were saying, when it comes down to things like flea treatments and wormers or nutrition, quite often the receptionist or front of house staff are the people who are tasked with, or just end up falling into talking to customers at the front desk about these products that are oftentimes being sold through the vet. And again, for pet owners, it's really useful. Yes, online is out there, but for a veterinary practice, actually having somebody that you can talk to about what your pet really needs is often really, really helpful. So think about CPD that may well help these individuals within the practice, utilise some of these sorts of products as an additional income stream for the practice, because that's where it's really got the value for them. And again, don't forget, senior vets also have a role in developing their staff. Your CPD is a useful tool to help them, even if they're not using it themselves, as we've said. And finally, although we're sort of going off-piste with the CPD thing, education is a useful tool for the practices themselves. A lot of our vets talked about thinking about the practice, how their practice can engage with their own clients. Some of the equine vets were talking about taking roadshows out to livery yards, where they were talking about laminitis, about Cushing's and so on. And, you know, having materials that they could take out that had been provided through from brand owners was a really, really useful asset. You know, it's okay, it's for them, it's promoting their practice rather than you know, the directly thinking about a specific product. But it is educating the clients, and they love it. Very, very valuable resource for the vets themselves. Yet slightly not CPD, but it is education, and it's valuable education that potentially could be a tool for you to continue to you know, get another another strand of engagement through with this audience. And just as an example, something that we did recently for Becra was taking that education through to, in fact, this developed into a whole other website for DECRA, which was patient-facing, which was for horse owners, talking all about pain in horses and you know, there to enable horse owners to understand what's going on with equine pain. So, point 2 of our do's and don'ts. Don't limit your subject matter. Again, as brand marketeers, you know, our interest tends to be focused in on our product and by extension, the condition that product is treating. Now, obviously, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but don't lose sight of the fact that skill sets vets need support in, you know, are oftentimes, particularly at the senior end, more about the challenges of business and management. And in fact, there's been a lot of conversation and recognition in recent years that the vet schools themselves need to really, you know, improve on the way that they address business and entrepreneurial skills as part of the curriculum. You know, it's one of those things that's not yet been a huge consensus on how they tackle it. But given the pressure that individual practices have in terms of profit and business development, you know, talking about these subjects as part of CPD can really be invaluable and can be an additional way of engaging with sort of those senior vets who may well think, well, you know, clinically you're not actually going to tell me too much in a CPD module talking about, you know, common dermatological conditions in dogs, for example, you know, give them something which is going to actually make a real difference to their business and to their livelihood at the end of the day. Point 3, don't compromise on design. Again, when we start to get into things like education modules, again, quite rightly, we think about the content. But as always, we're in a competitive field here, as we said. There's lots of CPD out there. It's not just about the content. It's about the way it's packaged. It's about the way it's communicated. And what you've got to do as marketeers, you know, you're competing as much as you're competing on when we're marketing the product, when we're marketing the brand. We've got to stand out from the crowd. We've got to communicate quality content. We've got to make use of absolutely every cue that we can in order to, you know, gain that engagement that we're wanting to do. It's the whole point of us doing CPD in the first place. So think about the design. You know, it's about you know, making sure that you've got brand consistency running through there. You've got some sort of template that actually gets you out there. Some examples here from some work we did with DECRA again. Make use of video. Make use of engagement. Make use of questioning throughout. Make it quiz heavy. Make it very, very interactive. And indeed, you know, talking about that segmentation thing, I know within some areas of CPD, it's even thinking about, you know, are there ways in which you can tailor it automatically, you know, pitch the level of the presentation dependent on people's performance in the pre-test, for example. You know, as technology becomes more sophisticated, these are things that can easily be done. Well, I say easily, can be done. Point 4, be right for your audience. As we saw earlier, massive, massive gender shift in the veterinary profession. But no big surprise to anybody, I hope, men and women are very different creatures. We communicate and we absorb communications in a very, very different way. And, you know, there are I could talk for hours about this, but I promise you I'm not going to. Loads of really interesting stuff we've done at the Foundry recently about thinking about how you start to appeal to female consumers. But there are big differences that are important for us marketeers. You know, it's about left brain versus right brain. That actually, in fact, is the same for all of us, but women do have more connections between the two hemispheres. They tend to be better at emotional and non-verbal processing. And it's great that you put the entire sentence down to one slide, so do forgive me, but oversimplifying it massively from a marketing perspective, you know, men tend to relate to each other hierarchically. It's about status. They tend to focus through on the headline rather than detail. Whereas women, much more empathetic, much more about collective rather than individual achievement, much more focus on the whole picture, including the detail. And, you know, not just within healthcare, but within marketing as a whole, you know, our history tends to have been driven by, you know, male creatives, male strategists and so on. An awful lot of marketing communications talk about performance, talk about status, and really sort of push the chest-beating agenda, you know, go wholeheartedly out for, you know, statistics, those sorts of things. May well be missing a trick, and it's just something, again, to start thinking about, you know, in the way that we pull together CPD. There was a great example that came through in the group that we had with our veterinary professionals. You know, the use of case studies and real-world examples to illustrate the point really can sort of start to bring things to life. It's a way in which it can really start to help people. So one of the ladies who's one of our equine vets, you know, actually even sort of said, you might, you know, when you're thinking about the case study or whatever, you might even give a horse a name or something that helps you remember it better. So it really is the way in which, you know, a fundamental difference in the way in which female and male brains work. You know, contextualize it, make it real. That's actually going to help your CPD and your engage. You know, again, other little bits and you know, it's not about making it pink. It's about, you know, use of imagery. The sharing thing is important. You know, women sharing things is one of the big drivers behind the social media revolution, and they still, you know, are driving that sharing of content on social media much more so than our men. So encourage sharing of your content. You know, actively do that. Actively push that sharing behaviour. And contextualise individual CPD materials against the bigger picture. You know, are you talking about your own development and into the practice and so on? And point 5, and perhaps really the one that sort of started to wrap this up, you know, it's about integrating CPD with the whole of your brand strategy. You know, I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody here about the importance of the CPD is very much a, you know, it's an expensive thing to do. We're doing this in order to create engagement. We're doing this in order to actually push our brand. We're doing this to get sales at the end of the day, unashamedly. So make it work hard. You're investing a lot into CPD, make it work hard. And again, our experience with DECRA really is illustrative of this. We put a lot into the development of CPD, and we developed the DECRA Academy as really a central hub for all of the CPD materials. And that academy has now grown to the point in which it's got over 13,000 veterinary professionals signed up. Now, obviously, that's a lot of data, and it gives us permission to talk to those 13,000 veterinary professionals about all sorts of things. So, you know, not just about CPD, but about the way in which we're, you know, other marketing materials, other marketing messages. So for Vetrol, for example, a treatment for Cushing's, then that CPD can sit at the heart of a campaign that then engenders emails where we're talking to professionals about it, mailers, press ads, so on and so forth. And again, the other thing about that, just before I move on, you know, it is a virtuous circle, because all of these materials again can start to recognise and start to link back into the CPD itself and promoting the academy itself. So, you know, all of it's beautifully integrated, and what we're doing, therefore, is really ensuring the biggest bang for our buck. So just to sum up, those 5 do's and don'ts: think about your segmentation and targeting. Don't limit your subject matter. Don't compromise on design. You know, it's comms at the end of the day. Do right for your audience in every way possible, and do integrate with your brand strategy. So that really is the end of the webinar for now. As I said at the beginning, it's a massive topic, this. Will and I have spent years immersed in this subject. So please do give us a shout. We don't bite. If there's anything that has caused a light bulb to go off in your head, or anything that you'd like to sort of discuss further, please do get in touch with us, and we'll happily talk to you some more about this. So for now, that's it. Thank you very, very much for your attention. I'm now just going to hand over to Will, because I believe there's been a couple of questions that have come through. Thank you again.
Julie. Yeah, it's I'm pleased to say there's been quite a few questions actually from out there. So a couple of themes have started to emerge. One around this idea of whether or not you should charge for a CPD as a brand. It's a tricky one, this, because brand-sponsored CPD, it is, to our mind, generally given away free. It is difficult for pharma companies to charge, as I think their audience vets, they're just so used to receiving it as more of a value-added service, as opposed to going to the likes of CPD Solutions, where that is them as a company. That's what they do. When it comes from pharma companies, it's usually part of a broader marketing activity to promote a product or a condition. So I would say, all told, it's probably pretty risky for brands to start charging for it. And I suppose there might be a couple of exceptions to that if, I don't know, the topic or maybe the way it was delivered was especially innovative, or it covered a topic that was really valuable to vet practices and might even help them grow their business as a result, then yeah, maybe you can think about charging. If Jules talked about getting a KOL on board to help add some credibility to the program, again, if they were the absolute recognised expert in that particular field, then you might start to think about charging. But as with all these things, that the market dictates, and I've certainly personally never seen it at a pharma company put a cost to any of the programs. So I hope that answers that question. A couple of you asking what are the best ways of promoting CPD. It's a good question. I suppose if you really want the numbers, then the most effective way is probably through paid advertising, taking out a page in something like Vet Times or one of the other big trade publications. But that is massively expensive. So speaking from experience we've had with DECRA, we've used some of the portals like Vet Surgeon or Vet Nurse to good effect. And they're especially good when you're trying to promote online CPD, as we were in the case of the DECRA Academy. And that's because you come across a banner on one of these portals, you can click straight through to a registration page, and it makes the whole process a whole lot simpler for vets to sign up. And as Jules alluded to, if you can get them to fill in a form online, all the better, because that way you're collecting data, and you can use that in the future to send emails promoting other CPD programs or any of your other, use it to support any of your other brand marketing activity. So the only thing we'd say there is make sure you're getting people to opt in, because there's nothing worse than receiving spam emails. So, but on the whole, I guess if you're trying to promote CPD, you treat it like any other marketing activity. Check what channels are available, try to understand where your audience exists, and then decide which is the best use of the budget you've got. I suppose if you can, build into that mechanism a way to track how your audience have heard about the CPD program when they sign up, so that when you come to promote future programs, then you can refine your targeting accordingly. So I hope that's answered that question. I know we've run slightly over time, so we'll have to leave the others for now. And that brings us to the end of the webinar. as Ian said, if you would like a copy, this has been recorded and it will be made available on the Foundry Healthcare website very soon. So yeah, I hope you found it a useful session. Thank you ever so much for listening in. If you have any questions, please just get in touch with us. I know it's a big topic this, so we'd love to hear from you. So yeah, thank you again. Look out for any future webinars in the future from us, and goodbye.
Muted.